pastor. And I am preaching all today because it's a great honor to be with you in this capacity, since you've never heard me preach, but also because I am applying to be a commissioned candidate in the United Methodist Church, which means I would be a probationary clergy person awaiting ordination, and I have to preach a sermon. So I thank you very much. This is an important desire, and some of you might know I'm going to be working for the conference this next year, so you're also giving me a head start on getting ready to preach to lots of churches all over the conference. So why don't you join me in a prayer before we get started. God, thank you for this time to be together, to hear your word, and to think about what it means for our lives. Help us not to be distracted by all the things going on around outside of us, but instead to listen to what it is you want us to know today. Speak through me, God, and let your voice be heard in the people of this congregation. Amen. Take care. Be on your guard. Watch out. That is how Jesus starts his response to the anonymous man in the crowd who asks what should happen with his inheritance. What does the man want? He wants his brother to split his inheritance. And Jesus, unlike other Pharisees are teachers of the law, teachers of the scriptures. They usually handle issues of the law. Inheritance, an issue of the law. But Jesus says, I'm not a judge. Don't look to me for your answer. But instead, watch out for greed, for the allure of wealth. And then he goes on to tell a story. So because of this phrase, this take care, be on your guard, watch out, that is all the different ways that English language interprets the Greek there. They're all a call for us to pay attention to this part of the Gospel of Luke. What's about to come is really important for our lives as Christians, for us as followers of Jesus. We also know this for another reason. In the parable we just heard about the rich farmer, when he's called a fool, he's not called a fool by another human being. God speaks to the farmer in the parable. This is the only story that Jesus tells in the Gospel of Luke where God speaks. The only story where God thinks it's important enough to talk to the other person. So again, we need to look. What are we being told here? It must be essential to Jesus' ministry, essential to our lives and to what we need to do next. And I think that this attention we pay raises two questions. What does it mean to be rich in the sight of God? For God calls the man foolish. So what does it mean to be rich in the sight of God? And how do we know when we have enough? And if we realize we have enough, what do we do? I think it's important to know that Jesus isn't just talking to the disciples, right? There's a man in the crowd who's raised his hand. In this section of Luke, Jesus started by just teaching to the disciples. And as happens for Jesus, people have gathered. And these people are the Jewish community who would have a long tradition of caring for the poor, of making sure everyone in their community, the widows, the orphans, had what they needed, as well as taking care of themselves. This is a value that Luke would have had as well, a value for sharing inside the Roman Empire, which in many ways is like our culture. There's a huge gap between the rich and the poor. There is a power structure that uses violence to make sure it maintains control over the people. And we today have a huge gap between our rich and poor in this country and in this world. And so the people would have been really attuned to issues of wealth. They would have really listened for for that. But this section of Luke isn't just about wealth. I think that this section, as I was saying we need to pay attention to, is about how to live as disciples. How it is we're supposed to follow God and to turn ourselves away from the distractions of this world towards the promise of new life that comes with Christ's resurrection. The promise of a new way of being. And that's because Luke is writing to the first early Christians. He's writing to people like us, even though the audience of Jesus is Jewish people. And Luke didn't like greed. The early church was a very communal church. And it was very much a place where he made sure you took care of everyone else. Because in that agricultural society, your wealth was connected to the other people around you. Much of your life was tied to the land. So if you had a big crop and you owned the land, and you kept all of the crop for yourself, it might mean that other people around you, because they couldn't buy the food for you or barter for it, might not have access to the food that they needed. So one person becoming wealthy could mean that other people around them were not going to have all that they need. And as I said, Jesus highlights this section for us in the take care, watch out. So Luke is highlighting for us these issues of wealth. And all throughout his gospel, he talks to us about how wealth might be something that distracts us from God, that distracts us from how we follow God. And he's not saying get rid of all of your wealth, but beware when it might become the thing that turns you away from caring for others, from the life God has called you to. So we step for one more moment back to our own world. I don't know if you're reading the news this week, that a study came out of the University of Kansas about McDonald's and how much money they pay their workers, which is minimum wage, so about $7.25 an hour. Could vary state to state across the country. And McDonald's recently put on their accounting website, they have like a budget for you to fill out, and it writes in there for you your second job and how much money it thinks you need to have in your second job to make a living wage if you work at McDonald's. But many people who work at McDonald's don't have a second job. That is their job. They're working there 40 hours a week. Or if they do, then they're working 80 hours a week. They're working at McDonald's and somewhere else. And that's a pretty hard life. And this study from the University of Kansas said, if a Big Mac costs 68 cents more, McDonald's could double the wages of all of its workers. That would be a living wage. But it probably, would make the hamburgers cost more. So that might cut into the profits of some of the people that own the franchise and the larger corporation. But all of those people would have a living wage. And I wonder what this parable is saying. How do we know when we have enough? And what do we do when others around us might not have what they need? The philosopher Seneca said, it's not the man who has little, but the man who craves more that is poor. Not the man who has little, but the man who craves more. Jesus does not condemn the rich farmer in this story for having barns. Did you notice that? He doesn't have a barn. He has barns, plural, multiple, at the beginning of the story. And at the beginning of the story, there is not a problem. This man is a farmer, and he is a good farmer, and he has been blessed by God. But it seems to be that the problem that this man has, and the anonymous man in the crowd asking about his inheritance, is that they are forward-looking. They want more. And they want more for themselves. Right? This rich farmer, he's had a bumper crop. He has so much grain, so much food from his land, that it won't fit in his barns. His barns are now full. Maybe he has 5 barns. I have no idea how many barns he has. But he has 5 barns to start with, and they're all full. And he's like, I still have some truckloads of food left. What should I do? This is my problem. What do I do? and build all bigger barns. I need all new barns. And that's what he does. And that seems, I mean, you must be an agribusiness guy, right? To have multiple barns in the first century, you have to have a lot of land, you have to have a lot of people working for you. He's a big business. That might feel far away from us. But as many of you know, I recently moved here from Washington, D.C., so I had the joy of taking account of everything I owned and packing it all up in the car. And the thing that I kept finding was books. Every time I thought I was done, I would find another book. I found books under the bed, I found books under my pillow, I found books in the closet. I had a lot of books. I think probably by myself, 2 of those 5 shelves tall bookcases, just for me. And these are just the books I accumulated in seminary, because I'd already shipped everything before seminary to my parents' house. So you all probably have that experience. You probably have some of your kids' stuff, right? So this was just the more recent things I had accumulated.